On April 18, 2017, PAX, a subsidiary of the Pacific Alliance Group, submitted a complaint against Mr. Miles Guo to the New York court. It is important to know that the complaint was that Mr. Miles Guo guaranteed a loan agreement between Pangu and PAX. In fact, PAG has recognized that Pangu has paid off the loan. So, the loan agreement should be automatically terminated, so as the guarantor agreement. How can PAX submit a complaint of a terminated agreement? Moreover, even if the loan agreement remained, the creditor PAG should first demand the payment from Pangu, not the guarantor, Mr. Miles Guo. Not only that, the place of the issuance and execution of the so-called guarantor agreement and the residence of both parties are either China or Hong Kong, which are not within the jurisdiction of the New York court. The complaint was rejected by New York court in September 2017. However, the complaint was accepted for rehearing in April 2018. The only reason given was that Mr. Miles Guo purchased a property in New York City at that time. PAG started a 4-year legal battle against Mr. Miles Guo. Since the case was accepted, Edward Moss has served as the main lawyer representing PAG. In the past 4 years, Edward Moss submitted a large amount of unverifiable evidence from China to the court, and even documents with forged Mr. Miles Guo's signature. What's more is the New York court deprived Mr. Miles Guo's right to a jury trial without giving any reason. It was astounding that facing a flood of falsified evidence, the New York judge barred Mr. Miles Guo from questioning the veracity of any document. Something even more dramatic happened in October 2021. Edward Moss accepted an invitation from attorney Bradley Bondi to join Cahill LLP. Who is Bradley Bondi? He is the lawyer who once represented Mr. Miles Guo in cases, including GTV. Bradley Bondi, as Mr. Miles Guo's former legal advisor, ignored professional ethics for lawyers, invited Edward Moss to fight side by side, and used the confidential information obtained when he served as Mr. Miles Guo's lawyer to attack Mr. Miles Guo. Mr. Miles Guo's team of lawyers asked the 3 most authoritative lawyers' professional ethics evaluation agencies in the United States to give an evaluation, and finally found that Edward Moss seriously violated professional ethics. On January 14, 2022, the court ruled that the conflict of interest of PAG lawyers was established, and the attorney's qualification of the case representation must be lifted. Moss, who represented PAG for 5 years, was disqualified according to law. However, the falsified evidence he provided for the past 5 years has led the court to fine Mr. Miles Guo for a total of $134 million. In general, the penalty for a guarantor who guarantees a loan agreement of $30 million is not more than double the value of the original loan. Such a high penalty of nearly 5 times is never heard. Furthermore, the court even ruled the property on the 18th floor of 781 New York Avenue and the Lady May cruise ship, which do not belong to Mr. Miles Guo, to pay for the fines. Yes, this is how things happened. Why are so many top American lawyers willing to work for the CCP and even risk their reputation and future? The center of the problems is the CCP's infiltration over years, using blackmailing, bribery, honey traps, tactics, and China's huge market. Almost all Chinese companies are controlled by the CCP. Moss has law firms in Beijing Yintai area and Shanghai financial districts. As long as these elites collude with the CCP, they can easily access China's well-known companies, such as Alibaba. Behind this are massive interests, collusion, and corruption. What is the relationship between PAG and the Chinese Communist Party? Shan Weijian, the chairman and CEO of PAG, was born in 1954 in Beijing to a family of members of the Foreign Ministry, which is known to be Communist China's intelligence agency. In 1975, during the Cultural Revolution, he wrote a letter to Mao Zedong and Zhou Enlai to express his loyalty and gain the opportunity to return to the city to study. It has always been the rule of the Communist Party to only promote who has good roots, one of our own. Being a member of a family of foreign ministry, Shan Weijian was sent to study in the United States in 1982. He became the first foreign student from Red China in the history of a University of San Francisco. He was also one of the first group of agents infiltrating the West. He then became the promoter of China's 1,000 Talents program to steal science and technology from the world. In 1998, Sean Weijian joined Newbridge Capital as a founding partner. Sean took only 12 years to become chairman and CEO of PAG in 2010. Sean's first successful investment project was Hainan Sanya Phoenix Airport, which is part of HNA Group. When the CCP learned that Mr. Miles Guo started to expose the scandals of Wang Qishan and HNA Group on April 19, 2017, PAG's Sean Weijian was ordered to launch legal actions against Mr. Miles Guo one day earlier. All the evidence points to one conclusion, that PAG is the Hong Kong version of HNA Group. And Sean Weijian is the henchman for Wang Qishan and other kleptocratic families to launder and hide money overseas. The PAG case is a typical example of the CCP's infiltration and corruption of the Western judicial system. The CCP uses it to set back Mr. Miles Guo's efforts in taking down the CCP. The CCP has mastered the so-called two-gun, or even the multi-gun tactic, to perfection. Ever since Mr. Miles Guo launched the whistleblower movement to take down the CCP in 2017, the CCP has not only used the power of its sleepers overseas to pursue legal action against Mr. Miles Guo, but also used Westerners who have been controlled by CCP's blackmail, bribery, and honey traps to influence the US federal government's decisions with the intention of achieving the evil goal of deporting Mr. Miles Guo. A classic example of this is the involvement of George Higginbotham, a senior congressional affairs counselor of the Department of Justice, and Elliot Broidy, an American venture capitalist, in a covert campaign to influence the US government for the interests of the CCP. George Higginbotham was the first US Justice Department attorney to be criminally charged for corruption. He has accepted bribes from Zhou Luo, who has a Chinese communist background, and helped him launder money and funnel benefits to Elliot Broidy's lobbying with the goal of deporting Mr. Miles Guo. Both people confessed to their crimes. In the past 5 years of the whistleblower movement, the CCP has never stopped personal attacks and disinformation of Mr. Miles Guo. Now, the CCP uses the power of one country to get a verdict that requires Mr. Miles Guo to provide a huge fine of $134 million within 5 days. Mr. Miles Guo has made a huge decision that he would rather file for personal bankruptcy than settle. The American juridical system is not perfect, but it is still the most balanced system that can self-correct mistakes. This is what makes America great. The PAG case is the best example of the Chinese Communist Party's blackmail, bribery, and honey traps tactic to infiltrate the US judicial system. Today's verdict has created a deep crack in the cornerstone of the rule of law that the United States has been most proud of. The ruling of the PAG case can no longer be overturned, and the lawyers involved in the falsification will spend their lives paying the price. Sean Weijian and PAG must be investigated by the Department of Justice and independent prosecutors, and the US Congress must be involved in investigating the truth. Otherwise, the US cannot afford the harm and price brought by the PAG case. This is the only way that the United States and other Western civilized countries can take out the virus hidden in their sick body, and this virus is the Chinese Communist Party.